Okay, so we are very pleased to have with us today David McCorkle. In 2014, David McCorkle created the free website nclandgrants.com, providing searchable data for all North Carolina land grants along with 1 million and growing digital images. This work required detailed research into not only land grant history, but details on how documents were kept and cataloged and recatalogued over the years. David has presented various topics at meetings of the National Genealogical Society and numerous state and county genealogical and historical organizations, and to the staff of the State Archives of North Carolina. He is president of the Durham Orange Genealogical Society, first vice president of the North Carolina Genealogical Society, and on the board of the Wake and Mecklenburg County Genealogical Societies. He's also a member of several other North Carolina societies. He's a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, known as APG. David grew up in Charlotte, and after graduating from UNC Chapel Hill in 1979 with a BS in zoology, he remained in the Research Triangle area working in the software industry. He currently owns and operates a software company in Cary, North Carolina, and manages to squeeze in genealogy and local history in his spare time. Oh, he has spare time. All ancestral lines on his father's side were present in what is now Union County, North Carolina, by the 1800s, some as early as the 1750s. Let's welcome David McCorkle. And David, you're welcome to share your screen.
Okay, thanks. I should have looked at that bio first. It's got a couple of things that are out of date, but it's not that important. But like, I'm no longer on the board of Wake, et cetera, et cetera. But okay. We'll just leave it at that. Most of it's correct.
Okay. All right. So while David's getting his screen up, if everyone would just please mute yourselves and turn off your video during the presentation, and we look forward to seeing everyone back on video after David is finished. Thanks, David.
Sure. All right, I assume everybody can see just fine. This talk, it literally is put together at the last minute. It's based on a presentation I gave in December for Durham Orange Genealogy, and I saw Benita's here. Sorry, Benita, this will be a duplicate, but I added a few extra slides. We have a annual party in December, and we used to meet at a restaurant and have a quiz, and then when we switched to Zoom, that got a little tricky. So what we started doing is doing 5 quiz questions, then some little bit of North Carolina, I won't even call it trivia, but just, a little short presentation. So I had these series of short presentations, and I just kind of deleted stuff and merged them into one and added some slides. So I have no idea how long this is going to last, but bear with me on that. So there may be a couple of rough edges, but putting something together in an hour is can get a little tricky. So basically, a couple of things. First is if you haven't figured it out already, most records are not online. We seem to think so. I mean, ancestry.com has a ton, and Family Search has millions of reels. There is still a lot of papers at repositories like the State Archives of North Carolina that are not online. Or even more so, as I'm going to do on this presentation, you might not even think to look at. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to go over these 4 collections, the state treasurer and comptroller records, miscellaneous county records. Well, that's actually part 1 and 2. And then kind of a subset of that called the county slavery records. And you've probably gone over those in some previous Let's Talk genealogies. So what's of interest, though, in these records is what are we looking for? We're looking for name, place, and date. So if you think of something like the treasurer records, why would that have name, places, and dates? You might not think to look there, but it actually does. So that's what we're going to start. And it's an interesting collection. The treasurer's office and the comptrollers are 2 separate divisions of the state. But in the past, the records got commingled, and the archives determined it was impossible to split them out. So they just made this collection called the treasurer and comptroller records. Now, it's got a lot of sections to it. There's a very famous one, which is Revolutionary War pension, receipts. So you can see, like, if your ancestor was paid for their service and things like that. that's been abstracted and put online, and it's all over the place. But there's a lesser known section called county settlements with the state. So it's basically when the counties are paying their taxes into the state, and that results in some records that actually are naming names. They're currently in these terrible flat boxes, but they're being reworked now to put into nicer boxes. So they're kind of hard to look through. But so a lot of them are these, well, if you're a historian, maybe not boring. This is Orange County. So it's just showing you how many acres of lands were taxed for each of the districts of Orange County. So that's the kind of stuff you'd probably expect. However, now we get something that says, this is an order, excuse me, and it's listing all these names. You can see there's a ton of names there, and basically they're being recommended as pauper persons from age, poverty, and infirmity to be exempted from taxes. So in other words, the county is sending to the state, here are the people that are too poor to pay taxes, so please forgive them. So that's the kind of record that you're going to find here that you're not going to really find in other places where, you know, because they're doing it back to the state. And as you know, with paper, where it ends up, it stays. They're not going to send a receipt back to the county that ends up in county records. It stays at the state. So that's why this collection is pretty important to look at. And I will say a lot of my examples are going to be from Orange County because that's where this lecture was given. Hold on. Here's another one. This one is a list of supernumeraries and tavern taxes. So you can see, like, below that blue line, these are the people who own taverns. Now, you might not care how much tax you paid, but this could tell you that your ancestor used to own a tavern. The supernumerary, I'd never seen that word before. I had to ask my my expert consultant, Diane Richard, and it basically just means people they listed who they didn't necessarily have to list. And you notice, actually, we have a Negro man and his wife listed for who knows what reason. This is a good one from Robeson County, which I just recently added in. It's a list of merchants and retailers of spirituous liquors, peddlers, circus riders, natural curiosities, sleight of hand performers, and horse drivers for 1849. So basically, you know, a lot of us think that tax is a new thing. It's not. They used to tax all sorts of things back then. They didn't have income tax, so they would just tax if you were a peddler, if you sold liquor, or in this case, circus riders. So here we have these people who were like traveling circus guys, I guess, like Raymond and Company, sleight of hand performers, and natural curiosities. I thought that was pretty cool. But again, if, you know, a peddler could have been traveling from another county. So here's some evidence that maybe your ancestor was in a different place that you didn't realize because they were a peddler going from different places. Then at the bottom, we've got all the people selling liquor. Okay. Now here's one. Here's a list of persons who failed to give in their list of taxables, but from whom collection was made by the sheriff. So you're supposed to list your tax at your property, just like we do now, and they tax you based on that. These people did not list their property. So that means if you go to the Orange County property tax list for that year, looking for who owned land, they're not going to be there because they didn't list it. However, the sheriff came along and collected it. So now I can see that these people, and I can see the number of acres of land they have. So now I've got evidence of their land ownership that I might not get from a county record, but I'm getting it from, again, this state treasurer record. So again, when you go through these records, there's going to be a lot of just list of numbers for the whole county, but then you're going to come upon something with names. And in fact, to emphasize this is one page. Look at all those names. I mean, I don't know how many names per square inch there is on this thing, but again, when we're looking for time and place, here it all is. All right. Now, I didn't tell the host this, but as I mentioned, this was done as part of a trivia thing as well. I kept in one trivia question from each section just to kind of make things a little interesting for you, okay? And I'll give you the answer, so it's not going to be graded or anything. So the first trivia question is, what year was the earliest known reference to making corn whiskey in North Carolina? Was it 1680, 1703, 1753, or 1805? And again, I won't spend too much time on this. We'll go straight to the answer. It was actually in the year 1860. A guy named Thomas Ashe had visited North Carolina and commented on what the settlers there were doing. And he basically said that their chief crop is Indian corn. And they're real excited because you get 2 harvests a year, but then they make wholesome bread, cornbread. So people were eating cornbread in North Carolina in 1680. So that's good to know. And then later on, he says they ferment it and make a very strong spirit from help of an alembic. And I had to look that up. And that's what an alembic is. It's basically, looks like a moonshine still to me, right? So we were making corn whiskey back that long ago. All right, now let's go to miscellaneous county records. Let me explain how this works. So North Carolina is a little different than a lot of other states in that the counties can send all their old stuff to the state archives. So, and they were doing quite a lot of this a few years ago. And if you think about it, you've got 100 different counties and they got 100 different ways of storing records. And the way archives work is they're supposed to do something, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, it's French, like respect des fonds, which means keep things in the same classification, order, whatever that you get them from. They violated that with the county records. They decided it's better to make a consistent set of records for the counties, no matter how the counties kept them. So for example, if you go through the county records, you'll find a collection called criminal action papers. Now, each county may have kept that separately, but when they came into the archives, they made criminal action papers for all the different counties, and they did apprentice bonds. They put all them in the same collection. So they took all these counties, and it didn't matter how the county collected them, they made a consistent collection. Now, obviously, they didn't want to classify everything, so they came up with this one category called miscellaneous county records. So it's just whatever didn't fit in one of the big categories we have. And you can find all sorts of good stuff in there. And it's going to vary by county. Some counties will have a huge section of one type of record. Others will have nothing. So it's going to depend on the county. Orange County has a good collection of what are called the coroner's inquest. It means what it says. Basically, somebody dies and we need to find out what was going on. And you can see we have a bunch of different folders here. So here's an example. It basically says, my Zoom thing's in the way. Hold on a second. I'm going to move it to the bottom. A certain man supposed to be Joseph Baker Pace was this day found dead. So what do we get here? First, we got death evidence of when this guy died, and we know death records didn't start till 1913. So here's the good evidence of the death and maybe even how they died. And then it said basically we're going to get a jury of good and lawful men to go view the body and determine what matter is done. This was in 1813. So now we, something looks suspicious. Let's figure out why they died. All right. And that's what I just said. And some of these, like you can figure with coroner records, you might be a little, I guess, give a trigger warning on these. But like, for example, this says the following, that he came to his death by hanging himself with a small rope from a joist in his own horse stable. And you see the signatures of the people who determined that. So, again, just like everything else in genealogy, you got to take the good with the bad, right? This one was a really odd to me. It said this person died with the violation of God in a natural way. And I had no idea what that's trying to say. And I did Google and I asked some people and it didn't make a bit of sense. However, there's another phrase called the visitation of God. And that appears very often in coroner records, basically saying God came along and said, hey, it's your time, let's go. And I think this is a typo. Basically, I think the guy meant to say visitation and said violation, because otherwise, if you read this, it makes no sense. So again, people made mistakes back then as well. This particular one here, this one was fascinating to me because it says that he came by his death, and then it says from the contents of A, then they cross it out and then say accidentally. So what's going on here? It's like, were they getting ready to say he died by drinking poison, then they changed their mind and said, no, it was an accident. So I thought that was really funny. And, paper was expensive. They're not going to rewrite this whole thing just because they made a mistake and they were going to say he died from the contents of something and they changed it to accidentally. So I always love things like that in records. Okay. And here's some more. I wish I knew how to make my little Zoom thing go away because it keeps getting in my way. Hold on, give me just 1 second here. If it's at the top, it's at the way. If it's at the bottom, it's in the way. Okay, the other thing is the set of records called the CRX records. So what happened is the state archives is in charge of making sure that the records they get were in the right, they got them from the county had them, they can validate that they were real. But I like to use the example, suppose the Register of Deeds comes home, takes work home from him, it takes his work home and he's working on stuff and then he passes away and the work never makes it back to the county. And his family just throws it in a chest, puts it up in the attic, and 100 years later, the ancestors find all these county records, and they go, oh, wow, we need to give these to the state archives. Well, the state archives can't prove that, they left the custody of the county, so they can't actually prove 100% that they are accurate records, but we know they are. So they put them in the section called CRX. And in CRX, you will literally find every kind of record that the state archives counties have will be in CRX. You'll find land records, you'll find wills, you'll find deeds. Anything that lost chain of custody or provenance from the county is going to be in the CRX record. So they're worth looking into. And there's a lot of them. There's 400 boxes of them. This one here is an estate record. So this is something we would normally find in the loose estate files, which are all online. However, this particular one ended up in CRX, so you're not going to find it online. So this is one of those, who we owed money to kind of things. Here's another one. This is basically, it's just a jury, but again, it's supposed to be in the court records, but it ended up in CRX. The reason this is slightly of interest to me, and I don't have, I guess you can see my cursor, Elias Presley is my third great-grandfather. And in Union County, there's Presleys and Preslars, and I noticed he signed his name, it looks like Preslar, so that's kind of interesting, but then they wrote it up here as Presley, so I think they're pretty interchangeable. But as I mentioned, I'm way behind on my own family research because I've got sidetracked on other things. Here's another one. Here's the CRX with those lists of peddlers and retailers like we talked about in the Treasurer and Comptroller records. And you see again, here's retailers. So those tend to be the people who live in town. They've got their little shop and they're selling stuff. The peddlers are people that come and go. Okay, and this is 1847 and 8. And the reason, again, they're listing them is because they're taxing them. I ran into another one from Mecklenburg County, and I didn't get a chance to throw it in this presentation at the last minute, but it's a list of everyone who owned a cotton gin in Mecklenburg County in 1802. Cotton gins hadn't been around that long, so that's an interesting thing to note if that was your ancestor. Again, here's insolvents, people who were poor, couldn't pay their taxes and such. Here was another interesting CRX. This is the minutes from the Court of Pleas and Quarter session. So it could be that some pages got taken out of that book and they ended up here because they couldn't legitimately put them back in the book where they came from. So again, any kind of record you can think of, you're going to find in these CRX records. All right, I know I talk fast. Let me slow down a minute. We'll do another trivia question. Are you ready? How many Revolutionary War battles were fought in North Carolina from 1776 to 1779? 0, 1, 8, or 23? So think on that a minute. And the answer is only one. The Battle of Moores Creek Bridge in February of 1776. So you start thinking about Kings Mountain, all these other battles we talk about. Those didn't happen until 1780. So basically what happened is in 1776, this Scottish residents of North Carolina, the governor got them together to fight against the Revolutionary War people, or the Patriots. They had this Battle of Moores Creek Bridge. They lost, and so the governor fled. He went to a ship off of Wilmington to try to run the state from there. But North Carolina basically became a chill place for those years. Even though there's battles going on up north and we're sending soldiers there, North Carolina itself was pretty, calm until Cornwallis came up in 1780, and that's when you start having all those other battles. So it was kind of a nice place to be for those few years. The other thing they did when they got the county records, and they were splitting them off, it didn't matter what type of record was. If it mentioned people related to enslavement, they put them in this category called the county slavery records. So you might have something that would have normally been in a criminal action paper, a civil action paper, and they said, aha, this mentions enslaved people, we're going to put it in these county slavery records. Now, did they do it perfectly? No, there's still going to be references in other collections, but they did a decent job. And you can find these from most counties. Now, this is Orange County. You can see it's quite a lot of records that you have to go through. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing where you just have to kind of sit down at the archives and start going through records. Fortunately, a lot of these got abstracted by a guy named William Byrd and John Smith, and they published these as North Carolina Slaves and Free Persons of Color. So these are abstracts of those slavery records, but they didn't do all of them. There's a number of counties they never got to. So those are good records to look at. And we'll just kind of quickly go over them. So like this particular one, we can see and I'm not good with names, but John somebody of Orange County is selling to James Duhan, and it lists all these different, the following Negroes, names, tons and tons of names, consideration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got those slavery sale records. Here's another one that's delivered unto somebody, and they're from a different county in Virginia. And this one mentions a Negro girl named Lindsay, who's 16 years old. So now we get an age. So we're getting a lot of good information here. And then we have the criminal records. Again, this normally would have been in criminal action papers, but instead they pulled it out and put it in these slavery records, basically talking about property of William. He was breaking into a store, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then this last one, oh, right. This is a petition to the state, and it's basically, excuse me, for a Negro man named Africa. And if you read about it, he's got these glowing recommendations on how this guy is the best guy in the world, and he's been really helpful and all that. And he ends and he asks for him to be emancipated. So you'll find those in these slavery records as well. And lastly, this one is just kind of interesting because people don't realize that enslaved people were actually allowed to carry guns if they had permission from the enslaver, up to a certain point. We got a point in North Carolina where they said no more of that. You know, as it got closer and closer to the war, a lot of the rights started getting taken away more and more. But, you know, if he's out hunting and stuff, they wanted him to have the right to be able to carry a gun. In this particular case, he's restricted to the plantation. And the only reason I mentioned this talks about Michael Holt, who I know was not, he was a white guy, I know that for sure, but just because a folder says slavery on it doesn't mean you're not going to find information about the, not just enslavers, but just other people who weren't, you know, or white people like my ancestors who may just be involved in some kind of transaction. So just for the same reason, if you're researching your Black ancestors, you want to look at all the records. When you're researching your white ancestors, you want to look at all the records as well. And another place where you'll find a lot of white ancestors mentioned is the slave patrol. There's kind of some misconceptions on this, that was just like a small group of people. It actually involved the whole county. I mean, it was kind of like being on jury duty. You would be called, in this case, this is Wake County, Panther Branch. It would list the names of people and that you're supposed to go patrol during these days and these times, looking for any, and not just enslaved people, but also free people of color had to have passes that they had to give, and the slave patrol would check for things like that. So you have all sorts of receipts. This is from Orange County. It's telling you when you were supposed to be there and things like that. So you can find a lot of that information in there as well. Okay. Let's see how I'm doing for time. 2:30. Oh, we're doing good. Ready for another question? Before Raleigh was established as the state capital, the legislature met in several different places. In which town did it not meet in? Did it not meet in Greenville, Hillsborough, Salisbury, or Smithfield? So if you're familiar with North Carolina history, you know, well, obviously Hillsborough and Salisbury, those were obvious places for the state capital to meet. So we can rule those out. And then between Greenville and Smithfield, I'd probably pick Greenville, the larger town. It was actually, Greenville is the place they did not meet. They did meet in Smithfield, believe it or not, little old Smithfield for a short period of time. Smithfield is famous for being the home of Ava Gardner and also their barbecue and chicken restaurant, but it was actually Greenville where they never met. And now back to some more miscellaneous county records. This is an interesting one. You know, as you probably figured out, I do land records, something called homestead and personal property exemptions. And that word homestead confuses people because they think, oh, it's the Homestead Act of 1842 when we gave land out west. It just means where you live. That's all homestead means, is where you're living. So this is homestead and personal property exemptions. And what would happen is court judgments were usually fines. You know, if you did something bad, a lot of times you would just fine you and you'd have to pay a bunch of money, or maybe you got sued. And just like today, you may be sued for more money than you have. So they said, well, we don't want you to be totally, you know, without any home or property or anything, and you're just left with nothing. Then you become a burden on society. So they allowed people to exempt personal property from that. So you get these lists. So this is basically a list of the things that the person is saying they didn't want to be exempted from these settlements or property or taxes or whatever. And the reason these are interesting is you find these lists of inventories in estate files. But if you think about it, especially if the person lived a long life, they've already given away a lot of their stuff to their kids. I know we sure did in my family. By the time my parents passed away, they didn't own anything. This is actually what they owned at that point in time. So you can see that this person had chairs and tables and all sorts of interesting stuff, little tea kettle and all that. So it's an interesting way of looking into your ancestors' lives. If they, it also tells you that they were in trouble because they had to do this listing in the first place. The other thing kind of related to being poor are minutes and accounts of the wardens of the poor. They used to have poorhouses where if you had nowhere else to go, you could go to the poorhouse. And some of these records are pretty good. And again, I've already mentioned, if you ever heard Diane Richards, she has an entire talk on poor people records that she's recently done. But like this is from Union County, and you can see it's got information. Where's the one I want to look at? Things in my way again. Yeah, down at the bottom, William died in the poorhouse the 23rd of October, 1858. How about that, right? So now I've got a good death date. You also see people coming in. You see people going out. This one came in with her boys. So there's a lot of good records in these poorhouse things that you will find under the miscellaneous county records. I think this was just, oh yeah, finally. So we have the miscellaneous, right? And they have things like poorhouse records, coroner records, et cetera. They finally got to the category which was so miscellaneous, they just call it literally the miscellaneous records. One of my favorites, miscellaneous. So this is just all sorts of wild stuff. There's a folder. Here's one called birth dates of various persons. If one of those persons is the person I'm researching, that's pretty good to know. It's got their birth dates. I have no idea. I could not figure out why they collected this information, but the county had it. And when they gave it to the state we'll make a folder called this. This one is related to a person named Antonio Di Martino, aged about 50 years ago. And he's doing, he came from born in Italy in the city of Naples, and he's coming into North Carolina. So here we have Italian immigrants in 1849. They didn't all come in the early 1900s. They came a long time ago. And same thing. And these are basically people, this is for another guy, and they're basically saying he's a good guy. We like him. So this was in 1814. So they're vouching for this man, that he's of moral character, et cetera, et cetera. He loves the Constitution. So not only do you have that person, but you have information on the people who are vouching for him. So you know that those were your ancestors. This one is, this is a guy, I probably should have highlighted the part. You see kind of now the close, it says he's going to keep a public ferry on the Hall River opposite of William somebody's plantation. So this is basically somebody applying for a ferry license that ended up in county miscellaneous. There's something called the Hillsborough Academy. Here's the people who bought tickets to try to fund it. So it's each person and how much they bought. And they even have the actual tickets for the benefit of the Hillsborough Academy. They had leftovers, I guess. So those ended up in miscellaneous records. And then I like this certificate stating that Henry and Priscilla Bird are free and entitled to the privileges of a free person in 1812. A whole folder just for them. Now, as far as finding these things, if you go to the State Archives website, they have their DOC catalog. In a lot of these cases, the folder names, at least the names, not the contents, have been indexed. So I could go in and look up Henry and Priscilla Bird, and I might be able to find this folder. It's not going to show you the contents or tell you what's necessarily in it, but you can at least get these folder names from the State Archives website. And then you can always contact them if you're not living around here and say, hey, can you photocopy some of these things from this particular folder for me? And they'll be glad to do it. So even though these aren't online, and let me tell you back, quite a few of them are. Family Search does have some of these. You can still try to get access to them. And one more trivia question. The term bunkum, meaning nonsense, comes from North Carolina's Buncombe County, which is the Asheville area. Why was this? Was a nickname for the Biltmore estate, which locals felt was outrageously large for a private residence? Was it because of the fraudulent land sales that were common in the mountains, including the famous Glasgow land fraud? Was it named after a long politician who was from that county? Or was it just that the locals would tell wild tales to the tourists? And the answer is C. There was a guy named Felix Walker, and he was talking and talking and talking to Congress, and the Congress people in 1820 were getting, they were kind of hissing him. They were just tired of him talking. And he turned to them and he said, I am not speaking to Congress. I'm speaking to Bunkum. When he meant the county, they interpreted it as he meant BS. So that's where that came from. All right. So that ends the talk. I am going to mention one thing. I'm going to do some self-plugging here. As they mentioned, I run a website called NC Land Grants. I do it now through a nonprofit called NC Historical Records Online. And we have been in a project to get all those records digitized by the state archives. And it takes a lot of, it takes money, but it also takes their time. Their digitization for the public, like us, is low priority. So we've been working on this for 2 years now, and I am happy to announce, are you ready? Announcing it here first. Well, actually one other place first, but this is second. It's been done. We now have 1.2 million images online representing all 200,000 land grants. And in this photo here, that's myself on the right. That's Sarah Koonce, who's the state archivist. The guy in the middle is Eric Moser. He's the head of the digitization, the microfilm lab. See that little red box he's holding in his hand? That has 1.2 million images. That's the equivalent of that cabinet he's standing behind. If you look at one of those cabinet drawers, that's how many microfilms reels are in each of those things. All of that cabinet is on that one little drive. And more importantly, it's now online soon on NC Web Land Grants. The reason I haven't sent out big announcements yet is I still have a couple of hours of work to get the final ones cataloged, but hopefully sometime next week, this will all be online. So that does my talk. Appreciate everybody. And feel free to ask me any questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, David. Let me get my gallery back up. That was an absolutely wonderful talk, so informative, and I know that I'm going to have to go back and replay it so that I can be totally focused on it and not doing some of the stuff Taneya and I are doing behind the scenes here. But we just want to thank you again for stepping in. Just amazing. I, had no doubt that you would be amazing, and I was right. And let's everybody just give David a big virtual hand, those who he can see. We're going to do a few announcements, and then we do have a few questions for you. And if you also have a question and you did not put it in the chat, you're welcome to raise your virtual hand, and we will allow you to just ask David your question live on camera. David, I do want to let you know, you probably didn't realize it, but some of us were trying to answer the trivia questions in the chat. You were going so fast, but I got everyone wrong that I did. Taneya got hers wrong. But we did have Stella and Benita who got the last question right. So congratulations to them.
Well, I will tell you, it's when we do it every year, it's a 20-question quiz, and I think the most anyone has ever got is half.
Oh,
wow.
And it's
That
not just,
I
only did the North Carolina history. I also asked trivia questions just kind of related to popular culture in North Carolina. It's North Carolina focused, and then we do a little bit of genealogy. But yeah, we've been doing it. I've got quite a data. I've probably got pushing 200 questions now over the years. So I'm thinking of trying to figure out maybe I can do some kind of online database quiz thing that people can take.
Yeah, a great way to learn and be entertaining at the same time. So that's fun.
Yeah. Well, David, take a little break and we'll just do a couple of announcements and then we'll come right back to you.
Do we want to end the recording now?
That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. All right. We reserve our after chat for the Zoom. So
yes, my Zoom is not behaving.